Okay. Hello, folks. This is one that's been requested a few times, actually, and most recently one of our subscribers, Bruce, mentioned if I could do one of these on tuning. And over the years, thanks to those people, I've always actually gotten a lot of compliments and positive feedback on my tuning. So I'll go through it with you. And I've just got this drum here. This is just a 10-inch Mapex, Armory, right? It's 10 that usually has been sitting here. I'm just going to do this in real time. So this drum is currently tuned up and I'm using it. I'm just going to loosen everything off. So while I'm doing that and while it's fresh on my mind, just today there's a new episode of Breakfast with Vinny, which I always get really excited to see a new one come up and just go, yes, I'm going to watch that. I usually can't help myself, I have to watch them if I can, if I've got time. And the guest was, and I hope, it's Chris Hewer, I hope I get that right. And Chris Hewer is a drum maker and drum repairer and just all things drums, and he's Vinny's go-to guy for anything that Vinny needs on his drums. So that was a really good podcast, like they always are. I love them. They're great. I get really inspired by the fact that Vinny is doing that podcast. So go and check that out. And then there'll be the links there, and you can get the correct spelling of the name, and you can go and find Chris Hewer and check him out and whatever. So I'm going to leave the bottom head off. I'm going to take this top head off so that we can talk about something. Because I think drums can be a little bit overlooked sometimes as far as the detail that goes into them and all the variables that can contribute to the sound. Here's a quick little thing. See how I'm taking out these tension rods? Now, I'm a little bit of this school myself. Although I can get a bit lazy with it, where I would try and keep everything in the same place all the time. So I wouldn't take all my tension rods out and put them in a pile and then mix them all up. I want the same tension rods to go back into the same tension rod receivers. If you want a name drop of someone that does that, I know Gavin Harrison does that. And if you listen to his drums, I mean, man, to me they're some of the best sounding drums. It's everything there. It's the kit. It's the drums themselves. It's the choice of heads. It's the tuning. It's the player. It's everything. But he's someone that would adhere to that. So how I can do that is just go, okay, there's my badge. Facing that way. I'm going to take the head off. Oh, that one's still not quite there. Okay, I'm going to take that head off and put it to the side so that... There you go. So you don't have to do this. You can put it on a little stool, but I'll just place that on the ground. And I know where those tension rods have to go back again, even if they fall out when we put them on the ground. So here's the thing. There's lots of people who are really very, very knowledgeable about all this and drums, and I love it. I find it really interesting. And just over the years, I've gotten more and more kind of into it. So, keep loosening this off. But this drum here, for example, well, this is a maple birch hybrid shell, which the hybrid shell thing's been happening for quite a while. Because, different woods have different characteristics. But here's something just really simple to remember. I can't remember where I heard this. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was on the Drum History podcast talking about bearing edges. Pretty sure that was the episode. And he said that just keep it really simple, and what you have is hardwood and softwood. So maple and birch, these are hardwoods. So they're naturally going to be a bit louder, and they're going to project a bit more. And they're going to resonate more. Whereas when you get, say, like a poplar drum, like my little bebop kit here, which we might have a look at another time, those are softer woods. So those drum kits are going to tend to be a bit softer in their sound, not quite as loud, not quite as articulate. But that doesn't mean that they're worse. And in fact, it could mean, all right, I'm going to keep these just finger tight. It could mean that kit could be quite useful in the right setting, in a quieter setting or anything like that. These drums are maple, and I've always just preferred maple. I just like the articulation, I like the resonance of maple. These birch drums here, the one thing you notice, just even having the birch in them and the way the shell's constructed, is these are louder. Like this 10 is louder than that 10. So there's that, right? If you keep it simple in terms of wood, just hardwood and softwood, and those are roughly those kind of characteristics. But the other huge thing is this edge here, is the bearing edge. So if you're a drummer out there and you've got a kit, or even if it's a certain drum, a lot of people have trouble with 12s. But a certain drum and you just feel like it doesn't matter what you do, you can't get it to tune up properly, and you keep trying heads and different tunings, it might not be either of those things. And it might in fact be this bearing edge. If this were just cut off flat, like with a saw, and you put a head on it, there would be too much contact there'd be too much timber contacting the head. And so it would just kill the head. It would go but, and it would just sound like absolutely nothing. So let's go to the other extreme first. Say when drums started getting more modern, which would have been, I would say, the late 60s. This is where you could correct me on a few things. As rock started to happen, so that it was desirable to have drums that were louder and were going to project and be brighter and all of that. And that was the shift towards sharp 45 edges. So when you think about an edge, you think about a sharp edge, and then you've got your head, which, just so we can play around with this head, I'm going to take that off there. So this head, you can see this groove in here, right? Now when that head goes onto this drum, it's making contact with the head itself. Now if it's too buried into if it's too far out on the head, well, that's going to affect the sound of the head. If it's too far buried inside, well, that's going to affect. If it's not seating nicely inside the shape of the head, that is going to affect the sound. So if you think about a sharp edge, well, the sharp edge is going to give you the most attack and the most resonance from that head, because there is less timber touching it, right? It's no different to a drum where if you've got no dampening on it and you hit it and then you put a little bit of dampening on it and now it's a little bit more dampened, and then you go, I'll put a bit more on it and a bit more and a bit more. It's kind of like that with a bearing edge, where the further you go away towards rounding the bearing edge and rounding it over a little bit, the more it's going to deaden the drum a little bit, and it's going to put more of the drum in contact with the head. But here's one thing as well. Ideally, you want this to be flat, meaning when you put it on a glass table or a marble bench, it's flat, perfectly flat. So when this head is properly on this drum and it's nice and flat and it's seated properly, it means that the edge of the drum is making good contact with the head, which means when you hit the head, the energy can then distribute into the drum and help the drum sing and resonate. So that's where all these variations on, you should probably clean your hands too before doing this. So like in this drum, this is what I like actually, and I've custom done these drums quite similar to this. And what this is, it's a 45 inner cut, and it's got a small 45 outer cut, very standard for like a modern drum. But then it has, you know, you imagine you cut an inner cut and an outer cut, and you're going to have a sharp edge. But then these edges have been slightly rounded over, so the head isn't coming into contact with a really sharp edge. So you've got a little bit more of the drum head in contact with the edge of the drum shell, so that hopefully that energy can then go into the drums, the shell, and help it all resonate, right? So this is definitely something, this one's good, you know, and these edges are, this is what Mapex has started doing on this full kit. So this 16 here has a different bearing edge. The 14 and the 16, they have different edges to the 10 and the 12. They're 30s and they're more rounded over because you've got a bigger drum with more resonance. And what that does is it kind of evens out the drums a bit. So I don't want like a small tom that goes doom, and then a 12 or a 14 that goes boom. So by rounding those edges and creating a bit more contact with the head, it dampens that down naturally. And this is how I've cut my edges on my kit, because I don't like stuff on my kit. I mean, for my personal sound, I'll do it for the whatever project. But ideally, I want the drums all to be balanced. And I don't want to have stuff on them and gels and tape and all that. I don't like that stuff, but it's all just tools, you know. So that would be something to look at if you are having if you feel like you're just not getting anywhere with the drum. It could in fact be your bearing edge, and they're not very expensive to go and get them recut. If you're in America, I'm sure it's even cheaper. But over here, when I was doing it, I was charging about $260 for a whole kit. So I was 10-inch tom, maybe, I don't know, $17 a side or something like that. So there's that, right? So we've got a hardwood drum, hybrid hardwood drum. We've got a 45-degree inner outer cut with a slight round over, right? Which to me is like, that's what you want. So ideally it's so that when these heads go on, they seat properly, right? So let's pretend like this is a new head. Just get that stuff out of there. Good to have a bit of a rag on you. Okay, so I've got my new head, my edge is clean, that's all good, beauty, rightio. All I'm going to do is stick that on there, line it up with the badge, and then we're going to put put this back on, where I've still got all these basically lined up in the same spot, because I remember how I put it down. That's one of those things, like keeping the tension rods in all the same place. I don't know that like a lot of people do that, especially in like a situation where you've got to change a head really quickly. I don't know that you'd bother, except I always do that. You just undo them and take the hoop off. So they're all going back into the same receivers. So then you just finger tighten them down, which you all do this. You've seen this a million times, and this is the thing. I don't use any kind of special method or anything. I don't think. I've never used one of those tune bots. I don't use any gadgets to tune. I don't think you need to. And I reckon if you got a side-by-side drum tuned with a tune bot and one tuned with someone who had an ear, possibly the ear one would even sound a bit better. Because it isn't really a science. And as I've just kind of described, you have to treat every drum like that drum. Every drum has its own character and its own things that you have to work with, you know. So here we go. So these now, you've seen people do this, right? Pushing on the head. And like we just talked about, this head's sort of already seated, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to seat the head so that that edge is nicely sitting and that the head is seated and it's comfortable sitting there. And we've got good contact with the edge and the head. All right. So then all I would do, I'm just going to tighten these so that they just kiss the washer. I'm not even worrying about like whether I'm going around evenly or anything just yet. I just want to get all these down to where they just grab a tiny bit, really just so I can flip it over. All right, give that a little squish again. So I would always start on this side, on the reso side. Same again, just get these to like you can use 2 keys if you want. Some people like 2 keys and do it evenly like this. I might sometimes do that. But I'm just getting to a start point here. And again, this is one of those things, it's like anything. It's like you're gonna build a cabinet or make some bread or whatever it is. There's a way to do it, but you've also just got to find your kind of way that feels comfortable to you, right? So there it is. So there's just our head that's loosely done up, right? Now I can start to do a bit of opposites, and I'm just going off feel. So I'm not doing like a certain amount of turns. I'm just going off the feel of the tension. Like that. And I can already sort of hear it starting to want to, right? Still pretty dead, still pretty nothing. So we'll just sort of do that again. We might just go like, what's that, a half a turn. Opposite, opposite. I always, well, in this context, you know, to me this is sort of like a fusion kit, or it's a bit of like a all-purpose type of tuning, you know. So there are, of course, other ways to tune the drums, but this is just my default and how I like to tune my drums if I have the option to do whatever I want. Okay, so this is starting to sing a bit. So now this is when, and this head is on my, it's also loose, but it's on my, if that were tight, it's resting on my knees, so it's muffling that. Some people will use a key and tap the edge, but that can damage your edge and possibly damage your head. Oh, fingers pretty good. And now I'm actually listening for the pitch, and I'm going to try and get it to be even. So I don't want to go ding 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 ding. I want to try. Now listen to that. Now if I give it a press again. Hopefully you can hear that that's actually dropped down a little bit. It's pretty close. And what I'm looking for is I just want this head to start to really sing. pretty even. Okay, so that to me, that head sounds pretty even. It's got a bit of a ring, it's got a resonant, there's a bit of tension on that. I'll flip it over now. We may come back to that and tweak it a little bit, but that's it, done. Same thing on the top. Just want to get these things, we've already done them a little bit. Just start pulling them down. Going off feel again, which is a good reason to, like before, keep all your tension rods in the same tension rod receivers. But it's also a good reason to just keep your kit maintained if you can. Not like that one. Although actually it is. It just doesn't look it. If all your tension rods are nice and smooth, it makes it a lot easier to go off feel. Because we all know what that's like when you've got like a nice smooth tension rod and then a gritty hard one over here. Right, so I've already got some kind of tone out of it. Loose of that one. And that's the thing, is over time, especially if the kit's sitting there for a bit, or even if it's just one drum that's getting used all the time, you can be always making little tweaks, and as the head's settling in and finding its spot and just getting into that right spot. So sometimes just one or two lugs is all it takes. And it doesn't matter that you haven't made sure everything's perfectly even and all of that. It's a funny thing, you have to just work with each drum. Here it's starting to sing a bit now. Hopefully you can hear it. So I'm just going to leave that there just for a sec. Now let's see. Hopefully what I want is that this bottom head is a little bit above, maybe like a minor third or a second, minor second or something above that top head. So they're actually a bit close, I reckon. Alright, so I don't really like that. I want to get a bit more of a dip into it. So I'm going to tighten this bottom head up a little bit more. Yeah. Alright. Flip it over again. That's a bit high for me. So what you can also do is, I just want this to come down a little bit. So I could go and tune each lug, but quickly what we can do is, we just press on it like that. turn those off. Rightio, so let's loosen this top head off. It's not too bad. Let's take it down just a tiny touch more. Maybe we might even just give it another press. So I would probably just leave that like there, and then I'm going to put it on the drums, and then maybe I would make a little tweak here and there as I play it a little bit. But for that drum, that's not a bad place for it to be. Got a lot of sympathetic resonance happening here. So there you go, and that's what I would do. And then that would go on the kit, and then maybe I would make a little adjustment, and that's when you start making these tiny little, might be 1 or 2 lugs that you just want to loosen off a little bit as it sort of settles into its spot. So we talked about like the bearing edges, and then obviously briefly and a little bit about, and I'd encourage you to go and find out about that, because that knowledge is going to help you understand what you're doing when you're tuning a drum. So we talked about that, like the different wood type, the different bearing edge is going to make a huge difference. Whether or not that bearing edge is actually flat and the head is seated onto it properly is going to make a huge difference. Other one, of course, is heads and the type of heads you get. So once again, it's not always the fault of the head if it doesn't work. Sometimes there's so many variables, like you're looking for a particular sound and that head doesn't work on that particular drum. But that head may work really well on another drum, or it may work well on the same drum with someone who has a different sound preference or a different taste. These Evans UV1s, first time I've used them, I don't mind them. I like the concept that it's a single ply head, but it's 10 mil, so it's a thicker single ply head. Whereas these are just a more of a traditional Remo double ply head. And I just switch in between coated ambassadors and those. So obviously it's the same thing with heads, which I'm sure you all probably know. You know, 2-ply head's going to be a bit darker and a bit, it's going to last you a bit longer. It's just a bit heavier. Single-ply heads are going to give you a bit more attack and articulation, and they're going to shine a bit more, you know. So you have to be thinking about all of those kinds of things. And I just wouldn't overcomplicate it too much with all this, like everything's got to be perfectly even. It's like, yeah, come at it with a general aim at making it pretty even. But all of these components here make a difference. You know, the weight of the hardware on the drum affects the weight of the overall drum, right? The hoops matter. Die-cast hoops, the famous kind of Gretsch sound with the die-cast hoops. Well, they're a sort of a heavier hoop. and they can tend to kind of settle the drum down a little bit and not have so much overtone. However, they can be. I don't know that I totally agree, but maybe be a little bit trickier for some people to tune. Which, there's just the last, another final thing. I'll try and just finish this up. Really, that's all you want out of a drum. Can I tune the drum? Does the drum tune? It's no good having like a $500 10-inch tom if all these things are out of balance and I can't tune that tom, or I can only tune it in one place. Like, you will find this with, it's a noticeable difference between, say, cheap drum sets and expensive ones. My Canopus snare drum, for example. We'll do bass drums another time, but my snare drums are pretty much the same. My Canopus custom snare drum's a great high-end snare drum. I can tune that thing to anything, and it just goes anywhere. This kit is pretty good too, and these drums are also pretty good, where I've got an actual tuning range and I can tune the drum. That's really all that kind of matters. So that's all I do. It's really you can imagine that would be even a much faster process if I wasn't sitting here kind of going through it. And that's all it is, and I would encourage you to learn this stuff. I happen to find it really interesting and fascinating, and I constantly revisit, and if I find podcasts or things that are talking about drum construction and bearing edges and woods and all that stuff, I just find it really interesting. So I think that's probably one of the best things you can do if you are wondering about tuning, is just start to school yourself a little bit more on what you're tuning, and how what you're doing, or why what you're doing is having an effect on the drum, and understanding how this head has to make contact with this edge in such a way that is going to distribute energy into the drum shell, which is then going to make the drum shell resonate, which is hopefully ultimately going to give you a good sound. So there it is. That's it. No tricks, all pretty straight ahead. And like I said, if I were going to say reskin this whole kit, I would do that. I'd put all the drums on, I'd sit down, I'd play it for a while, I'd give it a good hit, and then I would do a few little tweaks. And often, probably most often, I won't even take a drum off the kit again. Like, if this goes on, pretty unlikely I'm going to take it off. I'm just going to, if I need to make a little tweak, I'm just going to reach under and do that and go, and that'll be it. So let me know in the comments if that's been very helpful to you at all, or if you've got any of your own little, if you'd like to correct anything, if you've got anything to add to that might help other people here watching, by all means, throw it in there, or leave in the comments and let me know how you do it and how you get a result, or any problems that you still may be facing that you can't diagnose, and you're trying to figure out, why can't I get this drum to work? Let me know in the comments, and we can talk about it, because there's so many videos on the tube about how to tune your drums, and it's really, there is a way, of course, but it's like I said before, it's like, well, how do you make pizza dough? We're all using the same ingredients. We've all got to knead the dough. We've all got to do these processes. And eventually it becomes about just you and how you feel it, and how it works for you and how you can get around it. So last time I'll say that, if you are interested in tuning, get deeper into being interested about the drums, and how all these little bits and pieces actually work to make this drum do what it does, and why these Mapex are doing amazing stuff now. Why these drum manufacturers put so much effort and resources into researching these things and trying these things out, and floating lugs and floating hardware and all of that stuff. So there you go. I reckon that doesn't sound too bad. I'd probably turn it down, tweak it down a little bit. What happens if we do one lug without even listening to it? Let's go like this. I liked it before. Got a bit of a dip. So we'll leave it there. Put any questions in the comments, or any of your little techniques. Go check out that new Breakfast with Vinny podcast with Chris Hewer, because that'll get you started, and just great to hear from people like that who are just so deep into it, and I could just sit there and ask questions for hours and hours and hours. And check out the Drum History podcast if you don't know of the Drum History podcast. It's a great podcast. That guy deserves a lot more subscribers. Great guests, awesome information. There's lots of stuff on there about the history of drum brands and history of drum making and cymbal makers and hardware, and it's a really amazing resource. So go check out the one on bearing edges, because they sort of cover a few different things in that one. I better stop talking. There it is. So that's my way to tune. We'll talk about jazz tunings and bass drums, and I might do a couple of others. So yeah, again, let me know. And thanks very much. Happy drumming, happy tuning.